Some promises change everything, and some kindness comes from the most unexpected places. When Sarah Bennett arrived in Montana Territory as a mail-order bride with her 2 younger sisters hiding behind her skirts, she braced herself for the rejection she knew was coming. No man wants 3 women when he paid for one. But Jonas McKenna just looked at those frightened girls and said something that stopped her heart. "I'll take all 3. In that moment, everything changed. A simple arrangement became something far deeper. 3 women alone in the world found shelter with a mountain man who'd lived 20 years in solitude. But surviving the brutal frontier would test them all in ways none of them imagined. What made a lonely man open his door to strangers who weren't part of the bargain? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The letter had arrived on a Tuesday morning, 6 months before Sarah Bennett would stand shivering at that remote Montana trading post. She remembered the moment precisely because it was the same day the bank officer came to their Boston townhouse with foreclosure papers and eyes that wouldn't quite meet hers. Her father had been dead 3 months. Her mother had followed him within 6 weeks, as if her heart simply couldn't bear the separation. The influenza that swept through Boston that winter took them both, leaving Sarah at 24 years old with twin sisters barely 16 and debts she hadn't known existed. Her father, bless his gentle soul, had been a dreamer and a terrible businessman. The modest import shop he'd run was built on loans and optimism, neither of which survived his passing. Sarah had tried everything. She'd sold the furniture piece by piece. She'd taken in sewing until her fingers bled. She'd applied for positions as a governess, a shop girl, even a laundress. But Boston was full of desperate women that winter, and she had 2 younger sisters she refused to abandon. No one wanted to hire one woman with 2 dependents in tow. The matrimonial agency advertisement had been in the back of the newspaper, nestled between patent medicine claims and appeals for westward expansion. Respectable women sought for Western correspondence and matrimony. Security and respectability guaranteed. She'd read it a dozen times before she finally walked through their door. Emma and Grace waiting anxiously at home. The agency office smelled of tobacco and old paper. A woman with sharp eyes and sharper cheekbones had looked Sarah up and down like she was evaluating livestock. "You're pretty enough," she'd said without preamble. "Good teeth. Can you read and write?" "Yes, ma'am. I can cook, keep house, manage accounts. The men don't care about accounts, dear. They want someone who won't complain about the isolation and can bear healthy children. You look sturdy enough. How old are you?" 24. "Getting on a bit, but you'll do." The woman had shuffled through papers on her cluttered desk. "We have several clients seeking wives. Montana Territory mostly. Some Wyoming. The fee is $15 for the arrangement, which includes correspondence services and travel voucher upon acceptance. $15. Sarah had exactly $17.30 to her name, but she'd paid it, because the alternative was watching her sisters end up in a workhouse or worse. The correspondence with Jonas McKenna had been brief and oddly formal. His letters came on rough paper in a careful, unpracticed hand. He was a trapper and hunter in the Montana mountains. Age 43, widower. He owned his land free and clear, had a sturdy cabin, and could provide well enough. He wasn't looking for romance. He'd written plainly. He was looking for companionship, someone to share the burden of frontier life. Someone who understood that mountain winters were hard, and silence was sometimes necessary. Sarah had appreciated his honesty. She'd been honest in return, or as honest as she dared. She was educated, capable, and alone. She didn't mention Emma and Grace in her letters. The agency had been clear. Men wanted one wife, not a ready-made family. Sarah had told herself she'd explain when she arrived. Surely a man desperate enough to order a bride from Boston would understand. Surely he wouldn't send them back into the cold. She'd been lying to herself, and she knew it. The journey west had taken 3 weeks. First the train, crowded and soot-filled, rattling through landscapes that grew progressively wilder. Emma had pressed her face to the window for the first few days, marveling at how the cities gave way to farmland, then to prairie, then to something vast and untamed. Grace had buried herself in the one book they brought, pretending to read, but really just hiding from her fear. They changed trains in Chicago, then again in Cheyenne. With each stop, civilization thinned. The women's dresses became simpler, the men's faces harder. By the time they'd boarded the stagecoach in Helena for the final leg to the mountain territories, Sarah felt like they'd traveled not just across a continent, but backward through time itself. The stagecoach had been an exercise in endurance. 6 days of bone-rattling roads, dust that worked its way into every fold of fabric, and the constant awareness that they were moving farther and farther from anything familiar. The other passengers, a whiskey merchant and a man who claimed to be a surveyor, had eyed the 3 women with undisguised curiosity, but had kept their distance after. Sarah's coolest Boston stare, Emma and Grace had grown quieter with each passing mile. At night, when they stopped at rough coaching inns that made their Boston townhouse seem palatial in memory, the twins would curl up on either side of Sarah in whatever bed they'd been given. "What if he's cruel?" Grace had whispered one night. "What if he hurts you? Then we'll leave," Sarah had promised, stroking her sister's hair. It was a lie. They had no money for return passage. They had nowhere to go back to. But Grace was 16 and terrified, and Sarah would lie 1,000 times if it brought her sister comfort. "What if he sends us away?" Anna had asked, always the more practical of the two. "What if he takes one look at all 3 of us and puts us right back on the stagecoach?" Sarah hadn't answered that, because she had no comfort to offer. It was her greatest fear. The trading post at Ironwood Station was barely a town, just a handful of rough buildings clustered where 2 mountain trails intersected. The stagecoach had deposited them there on a gray afternoon with clouds promising early snow. The driver had pointed to a lean-to structure that served as the post's excuse for a waiting area. "Your man's been notified. He'll come when he comes. Might be today, might be tomorrow. Mountain folk keep their own time." Asterisk, so they'd waited. Sarah in her best dress, now wrinkled and dust-stained despite her efforts. Emma and Grace in their matching blue traveling suits, looking like exotic birds in this rough-hewn place. Other people came and went from the trading post, offering curious glances but no conversation. Sarah kept her head high and her sisters close. He'd arrived near dusk, when Sarah had begun to fear they'd be spending the night in that drafty lean-to. She'd heard the horse before she saw the man, the steady clip of hooves on hard-packed earth. Then he'd rounded the corner of the trading post, and Sarah's breath had caught. Jonas McKenna was not what she'd expected. She'd pictured someone worn down by frontier life, perhaps stooped and weathered. The man who dismounted from that sturdy mountain horse was tall, well over 6 feet, and built like he'd been carved from the mountains themselves. His buckskin coat was warm but well-made. His dark hair shot through with silver and tied back from a face that was all hard planes and watchful eyes. He moved with the economy of someone who'd spent years in places where wasted motion could mean death. His eyes had found her immediately. Dark brown, unreadable. He'd studied her for a long moment, and Sarah had lifted her chin, refusing to be cowed. Then his gaze had shifted to Emma and Grace. Huddled on either side of her dot, this was it. The moment of rejection. Sarah had felt Grace's hand tighten on her sleeve, heard Emma's quick intake of breath. She'd opened her mouth to explain, to apologize, to beg. If she had to doubt, Jonas McKenna had looked at those 2 frightened girls for what felt like an eternity. Then he'd looked back at Sarah, and something had shifted in those watchful eyes. Not anger, something else. Something that looked almost like recognition. "I'll take all 3, he'd said. His voice was rough from disuse, but not unkind. "Get your things. We've got 2 hours of daylight left, and snow's coming." Just like that. No questions, no demands for explanation. Just acceptance. Sarah had stood frozen, unable to believe what she'd heard. Emma had made a small sound relief or disbelief, maybe both. Grace had started crying silently, tears tracking through the dust on her cheeks. Jonas had gathered their few bags with practiced efficiency and secured them to his horse. Then he'd gone into the trading post and emerged with a wagon borrowed. Sarah later learned, and helped each of them up onto the rough wooden seat. His hands had been careful when he'd assisted them, impersonal but gentle, the way you'd handle something fragile you didn't want to break. The ride into the mountains had been silent, except for the creak of wagon wheels and the first whisper of wind through pine trees. Sarah had sat beside the stranger, who just agreed to take responsibility for 3 women instead of 1, and she'd wondered what kind of man did such a thing. Kindness seemed too simple an explanation. Loneliness, maybe, or perhaps just the frontier pragmatism she'd heard about 3 pairs of hands were better than 1. Whatever his reasons, Jonas McKenna had said 5 words that changed everything. Now, as the wagon climbed higher into the darkening mountains and snow began to fall in earnest, Sarah realized there was no going back. For better or worse, their lives were bound to this silent mountain man and whatever awaited them in the wilderness ahead. She glanced at his profile, stern and unreadable in the fading light. He hadn't spoken since leaving the trading post. Hadn't asked why she'd brought her sisters or what she expected from this arrangement. He just drove the wagon steadily upward, his attention on the increasingly rough trail. Emma and Grace sat in the wagon bed behind them, wrapped in their cloaks, watching the landscape grow wilder with each passing mile. Sarah knew they were terrified. She was terrified too. But beneath the fear was something else, a fragile, cautious hope. He'd said he'd take all 3, and somehow, Sarah believed he'd meant it. The cabin appeared through the falling snow like something from a fairy tale, though Sarah suspected the reality would be far less enchanting than any story. It sat in a clearing carved from the pine forest, solid and square with a steep roof designed to shed heavy snow. Smoke curled from a stone chimney, and golden lamplight glowed in 2 small windows. Behind the cabin, she could make out the dark shapes of outbuildings, a barn, a smokehouse, what might have been a root cellar. Jonas brought the wagon to a stop and sat for a moment, his hands still on the reins. He seemed to be gathering himself, or perhaps second-guessing the decision he'd made at the trading post. Then he climbed down and came around to help them from the wagon. "Watch your step," he said, the first words he'd spoken since they'd left Ironwood Station. Ground's already freezing. The air was sharp and cold, carrying the scent of pine and wood smoke. Sarah's breath plumed white in the gathering darkness. Beside her, Grace shivered despite her heavy cloak, and Emma pressed close to Sarah's other side. They must have looked like refugees, Sarah thought. 3 city women clinging together against the mountain wilderness. Jonas retrieved their bags and started toward the cabin. He paused at the door, his hand on the latch, and turned back to look at them. "It's not much," he said quietly, "but it's sound. Keeps out the cold and the weather. That's what matters up here." He opened the door and stepped inside. And after a moment's hesitation, Sarah followed, her sisters right behind her. The interior was larger than it had appeared from outside. One main room that served as kitchen and living space, with a large stone fireplace dominating one wall. The furnishings were sparse but well made. A solid table with 4 chairs, a rocking chair near the hearth, shelves lined with supplies and tools, a small cook stove in the corner. Everything was clean and orderly, the home of a man who lived alone and had learned to be self-sufficient. But it was the door on the far wall that drew Sarah's attention. Jonas was standing beside it, his expression unreadable in the lamplight. His hand rested on the doorframe as if steadying himself. "Built this room 15 years ago," he said, his voice rough. Before he stopped, cleared his throat. It's small, but there's a good window. Gets morning light. I kept it aired out, kept it clean, just never. Another pause, longer this time. Never had cause to open it before now. He pushed the door open, and Sarah saw him close his eyes briefly, as if the sight pained him. She moved closer, Emma and Grace trailing behind her, and looked into the room. It was indeed small, but carefully finished. A narrow bed frame stood against one wall, the mattress still wrapped in protective canvas. A small dresser sat beneath the window, its surface bare but dust-free. Pegs on the wall for hanging clothes. A rag rug rolled neatly in the corner. Everything waiting preserved for someone who had never come. "My wife," Jonas said, and the words seemed dragged from somewhere deep inside him. "Margaret. She was carrying our child when we built this place." "A daughter," the midwife said, when his jaw clenched. "They both died. The baby first, then Margaret a few hours later. Nothing I could do. Nothing anyone could do." The silence that followed was profound. Sarah felt the weight of 15 years of grief in this small, perfect room that had been built with hope and left empty with loss. She understood now, with sudden clarity, why Jonas had agreed to take all three of them. It wasn't kindness or practicality or even loneliness. Though all of those might have played a part, it was this room. This empty room that had haunted him for 15 years. "I'm sorry," Sarah said softly, knowing the words were inadequate, but needing to say them anyway. Jonas shook his head, not looking at her. "Long time ago. But the room's here, and your sisters need a place to sleep. I'll bring in the mattress from the barn, get it set up. There's blankets in the chest, quilts Margaret made." His voice wavered slightly on his late wife's name. She'd be glad to know they were being used. She always said an empty house was a sad house. He moved past them with that same economical grace, back out into the cold to fetch the mattress. Emma and Grace stood frozen in the doorway of the room, their eyes wide. "He built this for his daughter," Grace whispered. "His baby daughter who died. And now he's giving it to us," Emma added, her voice thick with emotion. Sarah felt something shift in her chest, a crack in the careful wall she'd built around her heart. Jonas McKenna had lost everything, his wife, his child, the future he built this room for. And yet when three desperate strangers appeared at a trading post, he'd opened that room, opened his home, opened wounds that must have been long scarred over. She heard him moving outside. The sound of the barn door, his boots crunching on the freezing ground. This man, who spoke so little, but whose actions said everything. When he returned carrying the mattress, Sarah and her sisters helped him unwrap it and settle it onto the bed frame. It was good quality, better than Sarah had expected to find in a mountain cabin. Jonas brought blankets and quilts beautiful, patchwork pieces that showed Margaret's skilled hand. Sarah made up the bed while Jonas built up the fire in the main room. "There's venison stew from yesterday," he said, ladling the thick mixture into wooden bowls. "Coffee's on the stove. Help yourselves to whatever you need." They ate in near silence, the only sounds the crackle of the fire and the wind picking up outside. The stew was simple but good, rich with meat and root vegetables. Jonas ate quickly, efficiently, then stood and moved to the door. "Need to check the barn. Make sure everything's secure before the storm hits proper." He pulled on his heavy coat. "You should rest. It's been a long journey." "Mr. McKenna," Sarah began, but he held up a hand. "Jonas. Just Jonas. We're past formalities now, I figure." His eyes met hers, and for the first time she saw something in them beyond watchfulness, a flicker of uncertainty, maybe even vulnerability. "I know this isn't what you expected, any of you, but you're here now, and I meant what I said at the trading post. All three of you are welcome, for as long as you want to stay." He was gone before Sarah could respond. the door closing behind him with a solid thunk. Through the window, she watched his lantern bob across the clearing toward the barn. A small point of light against the darkness and swirling snow dot, Emma moved to stand beside her. "He's not what I expected," she said quietly. "What did you expect?" Sarah asked. "I don't know. Someone harder, maybe. Someone who'd be angry that you brought us." Emma was quiet for a moment. "But he looked at us, Sarah. Really looked at us. And when he opened that room," her voice broke, "that cost him something. I could see it." Grace joined them at the window. "Do you think we can make this work? Really work, I mean. Not just survive, but actually build a life here?" Sarah thought about the question. She thought about the long journey that had brought them here, about the debts and deaths and desperation that had driven her to answer a matrimonial advertisement. She thought about Jonas McKenna, a man who'd lived alone with his grief for 15 years, and then, without hesitation, had opened his door to 3 strangers. "I don't know," she admitted, "but he's giving us a chance. The least we can do is try." That night, Sarah lay awake in the small bed beside her sleeping sisters, listening to the wind howl around the cabin and the occasional sound of Jonas moving quietly in the main room. The reality of their situation settled over her like the heavy quilts, comforting and confining all at once. They were in the Montana wilderness with a man they didn't know, bound by an arrangement that was more hope than contract. Winter was closing in. The nearest town was hours away. Everything familiar was thousands of miles behind them. But the cabin was warm. The room Jonas had given them was clean and safe. And tomorrow, when she woke, she wouldn't have to face the world entirely alone. There would be Jonas, silent and watchful, but there. And Emma and Grace, safe under this roof instead of scattered to the winds of Boston's uncaring streets. Thought it wasn't the life Sarah had imagined for herself. But perhaps, she thought as sleep finally claimed her, it could be enough. Perhaps it could even be more than enough. In the main room, Jonas sat in his rocking chair and stared into the fire, Margaret's wedding band turning slowly between his fingers. He wore it on a leather cord around his neck, had worn it for 15 years, a reminder of love and loss. Tonight it felt heavier than usual. He'd meant what he'd said. He'd take all 3 of them, give them shelter, provide for them as best he could. It was the right thing to do, and Jonas had always tried to do right even when it cost him. But having people in his cabin again, hearing voices where there had been only silence, opening that room he'd kept closed for so long, it was like reopening wounds he'd thought were healed. Not painful, exactly. More like the ache of blood returning to a limb that had gone numb. He wondered what Margaret would think. She'd always wanted a full house, children running through the rooms, laughter echoing off the walls. She'd have loved Emma and Grace on sight, would have fussed over them and fed them and made them feel like they'd always belonged here. And Sarah, Margaret, would have liked. Sarah, too, would have appreciated her quiet strength. The way she held herself straight-backed and dignified even when she was clearly terrified. The way she'd positioned herself between him and her sisters at the trading post, ready to fight if she had to protect the girls she loved. Jonas had seen a lot of fear in his life. He'd seen it in men's eyes during the war, in animals caught in his traps, in his own reflection the day Margaret died. But he'd also seen courage, and Sarah Bennett had it in spades. It took courage to travel across a continent on a stranger's word. It took even more courage to do it with 2 children depending on you. He'd make this work somehow. He'd keep them safe through the winter, teach them what they needed to know to survive up here. And come spring, if they wanted to leave, he'd see them safely to wherever they wanted to go. But a small, traitorous part of him, the part that had been alone too long, hoped they'd stay outside. The snow fell steadily, covering the mountain in white silence. And inside the cabin, 5 people who had been strangers that morning slept under the same roof, bound together by circumstance and choice, beginning something none of them fully understood yet. The fire burned low, and Jonas finally allowed himself to sleep, still wearing Margaret's ring over his heart, but somehow feeling its weight a little less than he had in a very long time. Sarah woke to find the hand-carved comb on her pillow. For a long moment, she simply stared at it, her fingers trembling slightly as she picked it up. The wood was smooth as silk, each tooth perfectly shaped and sanded. It was beautiful, far more beautiful than anything she'd owned in Boston, despite its simplicity. Or perhaps because of it, thought Jonas must have left it during the night, must have crept to their door and placed it there while she slept. The thought of him standing there in the darkness, leaving this gift without ceremony or expectation of thanks, made her throat tight with emotion. Emma stirred beside her. "What is it?" Sarah showed her the comb, and Emma's eyes went soft. "Oh, Sarah, he carved that for you. He's been working on it every night by the fire." "I know," Sarah whispered. She'd watched him carve, had seen it take shape over the past weeks, but she hadn't quite believed it was for her until this moment, holding it in her hands. "He loves you," Grace said quietly from her side of the bed. "Maybe he doesn't know it yet, or maybe he's afraid to name it. But he does." Sarah wanted to deny it, but the words wouldn't come, because she suspected Grace was right. And more terrifying still, she suspected she might love him too, this quiet mountain man who spoke more through his hands than his words, who'd opened his home and his carefully guarded heart to 3 desperate strangers. She went about her morning tasks with the comb tucked carefully in her apron pocket, hyper-aware of its weight against her hip. Jonas had already left for his trap lines, as usual, but she felt his presence in every corner of the cabin, in the neatly stacked firewood, in the fresh water he'd hauled from the creek before dawn, in the one rocking chair by the hearth where he'd sat night after night, carving her gift. When he returned that evening, snow-dusted and carrying 2 rabbits for the pot, Sarah had her hair down for the first time since arriving. She'd washed it in heated water and combed it carefully with his gift, letting it dry by the fire before pinning it up. But she wanted him to see it down first, wanted him to know she valued what he'd made. Jonas stopped in the doorway, his eyes finding her immediately. He said nothing, but Sarah saw his throat work as he swallowed, saw the way his hands tightened on the rabbits he carried, saw something flash in his dark eyes, longing, perhaps, or recognition of the message she was trying to send. "Thank you," she said quietly, "for the comb. It's beautiful." "Suits you," he managed, his voice rougher than usual. Then he turned away quickly, moving to prepare the rabbits for skinning. But the moment hung between them, sweet and charged with possibilities neither was quite ready to name. The next morning brought a different kind of reality. Jonas came in from checking the smokehouse with a grim expression. "We're lower on supplies than I thought," he said without preamble. "Flour's almost gone. Coffee too. Salt pork won't last more than another few weeks." He looked at Sarah, and she saw worry in his eyes for the first time. "I need to make a run to the trading post. Should have gone before the first big snow, but I was—" He stopped, and Sarah understood. He'd been focused on making them comfortable, on teaching them to survive, and had neglected his usual preparations. "When will you leave?" she asked, trying to keep her voice steady. "Tomorrow at first light. It's a 2-day journey there and back if the weather holds. 3 if it doesn't." He paused. "I don't like leaving you alone up here, but there's no choice. We need those supplies to make it through winter." Sarah nodded, pushing down the fear rising in her chest. 2 days, 3 at most. She could manage that. She'd have to. That evening felt different. Jonas showed Sarah and the twins where everything was stored, went over emergency procedures they'd already covered. What to do if the fire went out. How to deal with animals near the cabin. The rifle was loaded and ready, though Jonas clearly doubted any of them could actually use it if needed. "You've learned a lot," he said to Sarah as they stood by the fire after the twins had gone to bed. "More than I expected, honestly. You'll be fine. All of you." "I'm afraid," Sarah admitted. The words came out before she could stop them. "Not of managing the cabin or the work, but of something happening to you out there. Of you not coming back." Jonas turned to face her fully. They stood closer than they usually allowed themselves, close enough that Sarah could see the firelight reflected in his eyes. "I'll come back," he said with quiet certainty. "I promise you that, Sarah. I'll come back." "How can you promise something like that?" "The weather, the distance, because I have reason to now." His hand lifted, hovering near her face, and after a moment's hesitation, he tucked a loose strand of her hair behind her ear. His fingers lingered, rough and warm against her skin. "Because I have something to come back to." Sarah's breath caught. They were standing on a precipice, she realized. One more word, one small movement forward, and everything would change between them. But Jonas stepped back, his hand falling to his side. "I should sleep. Early start tomorrow." Sarah nodded, not trusting her voice. She watched him bank the fire and retreat to his sleeping area on the far side of the main room. But she heard him moving restlessly long into the night, and she suspected neither of them slept much. He left before dawn, as promised. Sarah woke to find him already gone, his pack and rifle missing from their hooks. But he'd left the fire built high, and it brought in enough wood to last 3 days. On the table was a note in his careful handwriting. "Back soon. Stay safe, Jay." The first day alone wasn't so bad. Sarah and the twins kept busy with the usual tasks: cooking, cleaning, tending the fire. Emma practiced her leatherwork, growing more skilled each day. Grace read aloud from Jonas's books, her voice filling the silence he'd left behind. But the second day was harder. Sarah found herself watching the trail, listening for hoofbeats that didn't come. She told herself it was normal, that Jonas had said it could take 3 days. But worry gnawed at her anyway. The third day dawned gray and threatening. By midday, snow had begun to fall again, not the blizzard force of the earlier storm, but steady and concerning. Sarah paced the cabin, unable to settle to any task. Emma and Grace exchanged worried glances, but said nothing. The fourth day, the snow was worse. Sarah stood at the window, staring out at the white world, and felt fear settle into her bones. Something was wrong. She knew it with a certainty that defied logic. "He said 3 days at most," Emma said quietly, coming to stand beside her. "I know. Maybe the trading post is snowed in. Maybe he's just waiting it out there." "Maybe," Sarah agreed. But she didn't believe it. Jonas wouldn't stay away if he could possibly return. He'd promised. "Maybe," Sarah agreed. But she didn't believe it. Jonas wouldn't stay away if he could possibly return. He'd promised. The 5th day, Sarah made a decision. She couldn't just wait here. Couldn't just hope he'd appear. If something had happened to him, if he was hurt or lost, every hour mattered. She began preparing to search, pulling out the heavy furs Jonas had shown them, gathering supplies. Emma and Grace watched with wide eyes. "Sarah, you can't," Grace protested. "You don't know the way. You could get lost, could freeze." "I can't just leave him out there," Sarah said, her voice breaking. "I can't. If there's any chance he needs help." She stopped, pressing her hand to her mouth. When had this happened? When had Jonas McKenna become so essential that the thought of losing him was unbearable? But she knew the answer. It had happened gradually, in small moments. In every patient lesson. In every quiet gesture of care. In the way he looked at her sometimes, like she was something precious and unexpected. In the comb he'd carved with his own hands and left on her pillow like a promise. She loved him, and she couldn't lose him. Not when she'd just figured out what he meant to her. Sarah was wrapping herself in furs, preparing the twins for the possibility that she might not come back when she heard it. The faint sound of hooves crunching through snow. She ran to the door and flung it open. Through the falling snow, she saw him, Jonas, on his horse, swaying in the saddle, his face gray with exhaustion and cold. He nearly fell when he dismounted. Sarah ran to him, and suddenly she was holding him up, his weight heavy against her as they stumbled toward the cabin. Caught in the storm, he mumbled, his words slurred. Took shelter in a line shack. Waited too long. Shouldn't have. He shook his head, trying to clear it. Had to get back. Promised you I'd come back. His hands and feet were badly frostbitten, his face showing the first signs of exposure. Sarah and the twins worked together with sudden, decisive efficiency. They got his frozen outer clothes off, wrapped him in every blanket and fur they had. Sarah sent Emma to heat water, while Grace stoked the fire higher. Jonas was shivering violently, his teeth chattering too hard for speech. Sarah sat beside him, chafing his hands carefully, trying to restore circulation without damaging the frostbitten skin. His eyes, when they focused on her, were full of something that looked like wonder. You were going to come after me, he said, his gaze falling on the furs and supplies she'd laid out. You were going to search for me. Of course I was, Sarah said, her voice fierce. Did you think I'd just let you freeze out there? But you don't know the trails. You could have, I know, Sarah cut him off. I know all the reasons it was foolish. But Jonas, I couldn't just wait here and do nothing. I couldn't, her voice broke. I couldn't lose you. Something shifted in his fevered eyes. His hand, cold as it was, lifted to cup her face. Sarah, he whispered. Sarah, But whatever he meant to say was lost as his eyes rolled back and he slumped against her. The fever had him now, his body trying to recover from the exposure, and Sarah felt terror clutch her heart. She couldn't lose him. Not now. Not when she'd finally admitted what he meant to her. Help me, she said to the twins, her voice steady despite her fear. We're going to save him. Whatever it takes. For 3 days, Sarah barely left Jonas's side. They'd moved him closer to the fire, laid him on a pallet made of every soft thing they owned. His fever climbed and broke, and climbed again, his body fighting the exposure and exhaustion. Sarah bathed his face with cool water when the fever raged, wrapped him in Margaret's quilts when the chills took him. Emma and Grace took over all the other tasks, cooking, keeping the fire going, tending the animals. They moved through the cabin with quiet efficiency, these girls who'd been terrified children just weeks ago. Sarah saw them growing into capable young women before her eyes, rising to meet the crisis with a strength that made her proud. But most of her attention stayed fixed on Jonas. She spooned broth into him when he was coherent enough to swallow. She changed the dressings on his frostbitten hands and feet, wincing at the damage but working with steady care. And she talked to him quiet, rambling conversation about nothing and everything, because she'd heard that hearing was the last sense to go, and she refused to let him slip away into silence. On the second night, when his fever was at its worst, Jonas began to speak in his delirium. At first it was just fragments, Margaret's name, something about the baby, words Sarah couldn't quite make out. But then, clearly, unmistakably, he called for Sarah. Can't lose you, he mumbled, his eyes moving behind closed lids. Can't lose you too, Sarah. Need you. Need all of you. Sarah's hand found his, careful of the damaged skin, and she leaned close. I'm here, she whispered. I'm right here, Jonas. I'm not going anywhere. His fingers twitched in her grip, and some of the tension left his face. Grace, sitting quietly nearby with her sewing, spoke softly. He loves you, Sarah. You know that, don't you? I think I do, Sarah admitted. And Grace, I think I love him too. It should have felt strange, saying it aloud. She barely knew him, really. They'd shared a roof for only weeks. But Sarah had learned that time wasn't always the measure of connection. In the space of this brief, intense winter, they built something real. Something that mattered. On the third day, Jonas's fever finally broke for good. He woke with clear eyes, looking around the cabin with confusion that slowly sharpened into awareness. His gaze found Sarah, curled in the rocking chair beside his pallet, exhausted but alert. "How long?" he asked, his voice rough from disuse. 3 days, Sarah said, moving to kneel beside him. "How do you feel?" "Like I went 3 rounds with a grizzly and lost." He tried to sit up and winced. "My hands. Frostbite," Sarah said gently. "Not too severe. The worst of it is on your fingers. But Jonas, you need to rest. You pushed yourself too hard getting back here." "I had to get back," he said, his eyes finding hers. "Promised you." "You did," Sarah agreed, her throat tight. "You kept your promise. Nearly killed yourself doing it, but you kept it." Jonas was quiet for a moment, studying her face. "You were going to come after me. You'd laid out supplies, prepared the girls." "Sarah, that was foolish," she finished. "I know, but I couldn't just wait. Couldn't just hope you'd come back on your own. Jonas, when you didn't return." When the snow kept falling, she stopped, pressing her hand to her mouth, fighting for composure. "Sarah." His damaged hand lifted, touching her face with careful gentleness. "I'm sorry. I should have been more careful. Should have left earlier before the storm." "You came back," Sarah said simply. "That's what matters. You came back to us." "Always will," Jonas said, and there was something in his voice, a promise deeper than the one he'd made before leaving. "Long as I'm breathing, I'll come back to you." The words hung between them, weighted with meaning neither was quite ready to fully examine. But Sarah saw it in his eyes, in the way he looked at her. The same thing she felt, this unexpected love that had grown in the spaces between survival and hope. Over the next week, as Jonas recovered, something shifted in the cabin's atmosphere. The careful distance they'd maintained dissolved. Jonas sat propped by the fire, and Sarah would sit beside him, their shoulders nearly touching. When she brought him meals, their hands would brush, and neither would pull away. Emma and Grace watched with knowing smiles, but said nothing. They seemed pleased, Sarah thought, to see this quiet courtship unfolding. One evening, Jonas finally broached the subject that had been hovering unspoken between them. "I've been thinking," he said carefully. Sarah was helping him practice moving his healing fingers, the frostbite thankfully not as severe as they'd feared. "About this arrangement of ours, about what it means, what it could mean." Sarah's heart began to beat faster. "What have you been thinking?" "That it's not much of an arrangement anymore," Jonas said honestly. "Hasn't been for a while, if I'm honest with myself. Sarah, these past weeks, having you here, having the girls," he paused, seeming to search for words. "It's made me remember what it feels like to have a family, to have a reason beyond just surviving." "I know what you mean," Sarah said softly. "This was supposed to be practical, a solution to both our problems. But somewhere along the way, it became more," Jonas finished. His dark eyes met hers. "At least for me it did. I need you to know that, Sarah. I need you to know that when I said I'd take all 3 of you, I meant it for keeps. Not out of duty, not out of loneliness, but because I want you here. Because He stopped, swallowed. "Because I've come to care for you. Deeply." Sarah felt tears prick her eyes. "I care for you too, Jonas. More than I thought possible in such a short time. You've given us so much safety, home, kindness. You show me what it means to be truly seen and valued. Not for what I can provide, but for who I am." "You're remarkable," Jonas said simply. "Strong and brave and good. Margaret would have," his voice caught. "She would have liked you very much. Would have been glad, I think, that I found someone, that I didn't spend the rest of my life alone." It was the first time he'd spoken of his late wife in the present tense of Sarah's existence. acknowledging both loves, past and present, without guilt or shame. Sarah reached out and took his hand, careful of his healing fingers. I'm not trying to replace her, Jonas. I could never. I know, he said quickly. And I'm not comparing you to her. You're different people, different loves. But Sarah, what I'm trying to say, badly, I know, is that I want this to be real. I want us to be a real family. You and me and Emma and Grace. Not just an arrangement. Not just people sharing a roof to survive. But an actual family. Are you proposing to me, Jonas McKenna? Sarah asked, her voice trembling between laughter and tears. Jonas looked momentarily stricken. I suppose I am, though I'm making a mess of it. Don't even have a proper ring, and you deserve. Sarah leaned forward and kissed him. It was quick, chaste, just a brush of lips, but it silenced his self-recrimination and made his eyes go wide with wonder. Yes, she said simply. Yes, I'll marry you. For real this time, not because I'm desperate or you're lonely, but because I choose you. Because somewhere in the middle of learning to make bread and survive winters and carve out a life in this wild place, I fell in love with you. Jonas's hand came up to cup her face, his touch reverent despite his damaged fingers. You mean it? Truly? Truly, Sarah promised. If you'll have me, if you'll have all three of us, the way you said that first day. Always, Jonas said. And this time when he kissed her, it was slow and sweet and full of promises. Always and for keeps. From their room, Sarah heard the twins' muffled cheers, and she pulled back with a laugh. I think we have their blessing. Jonas smiled, truly smiled, transforming his usually stern features into something warm and alive. Then I'd say we're blessed indeed. That night, Sarah lay in bed with her sisters and felt peace settle over her like one of Margaret's quilts. They had a long way to go, still supplies to secure, a proper wedding to plan, a whole winter yet to survive. But they would face it together, as a family dot as something real and chosen and good. Spring came tentatively to the mountains, winter reluctant to release its hold. But slowly, inevitably, the snow began to melt. The first green shoots appeared in the meadow beyond the cabin. The creek ran high and fast with snowmelt, and the mountain pass, frozen shut since November, finally opened. Jonas had recovered fully from his frostbite, though his fingers remained slightly stiff on cold mornings, a permanent reminder of that desperate ride home through the storm. He'd made 2 more trips to the trading post as winter waned, shorter journeys to replenish critical supplies. Each time he returned, Sarah felt the same relief, the same joy at seeing him come home safe. They'd settled into an easy rhythm over those winter months. Emma had become remarkably skilled at leatherwork and had taken to helping Jonas with the trap lines when weather permitted. Grace continued teaching Jonas to read, his skills improving steadily. And Sarah had mastered the frontier kitchen, learning to make do with what they had and create meals that were more than just sustenance. They'd spoken often of their intention to marry properly, to make the journey to the nearest town with a circuit preacher and formalize their union before God and community. But winter had made such travel impossible, and they'd been content to wait. Their commitment to each other felt real regardless of official papers. So when Jonas came back from checking his traps one bright April morning with news of a visitor, Sarah felt only mild curiosity. Visitors were rare but not unheard of now that the pass was open. Marshal from the territorial government, Jonas said, hanging his coat by the door. Says he's investigating some kind of fraud. Asked if I knew anything about matrimonial agencies operating out east. Sarah felt her stomach drop. The agency. She'd almost forgotten about the agency that had arranged her correspondence with Jonas, and it seemed unimportant, whatever its legitimacy. It had brought her here, brought them together. What did it matter now? But apparently, it mattered a great deal. The marshal arrived an hour later, a tall, weathered man in his 50s with kind eyes and a no-nonsense manner. He accepted their offer of coffee and sat at the table with official papers spread before him. "I'll get straight to it," he said. "The Eastern matrimonial agency that arranged your—" he glanced at Sarah. "Correspondence with Mr. McKenna was a criminal operation. They've been defrauding women for years, taking fees for services they didn't actually provide legally." Sarah's hand found Jonas's under the table. "What do you mean, not legally?" "The contracts they drew up weren't worth the paper they were printed on," the marshal explained. "They had no authority to arrange marriages, no legal standing. More importantly, some of the men they claimed as clients never actually requested brides. The agency was essentially selling women into servitude by making false promises." Jonas's hand tightened on Sarah's. "Are you saying our arrangement wasn't legally binding?" the marshal confirmed. "Never was." "Miss Bennett," he looked at Sarah, "you have no legal obligation to remain here. Mr. McKenna has no legal claim to you or your sisters. The whole thing was a fraud from start to finish." The silence that followed was profound. Sarah felt the ground shifting beneath her, reality reorganizing itself around this new information. Everything she'd thought she understood about their arrangement, the contract, the obligation, the binding nature of what she'd agreed to was false. She was free. Had always been free. "We have the agency's operators in custody," the marshal continued, "and we're offering restitution to the women who were defrauded. Miss Bennett, you're entitled to a full refund of any fees you paid, plus compensation. More than that, we're offering safe passage back east for any women who wish to return. There's a train voucher waiting for you in Helena, and enough money to start over wherever you choose." Emma and Grace, who'd been listening from near the fireplace, made small sounds of distress. Sarah felt numb, unable to process the full implications of what she was hearing. "So Sarah doesn't have to stay?" Grace asked, her voice small. "We could leave?" "You're completely free," the marshal said gently. "All three of you. No obligation, legal or otherwise." Sarah's eyes found Jonas. He'd gone very still, his face carefully blank in that way she'd learned meant he was feeling too much to show. His hand had released hers, pulling back as if he no longer had the right to touch her. "I see," he said quietly. "When does she need to decide?" "I'll be in the area for 3 days," the marshal said. "If you want to accept the offer, the passage, the restitution, I can escort you to Helena before I head back east myself." He looked at Sarah with sympathy. "I know this must be a shock. Take your time to think it over." After the marshal left, promising to return in the morning for their answer, the cabin fell into heavy silence. Emma and Grace retreated to their room without being asked. Sensing the need for Sarah and Jonas to talk privately, Jonas stood by the window, his back to Sarah, looking out at the mountain that had been his home for so long. "You should go," he said finally, his voice rough. "You and the girls. Back east, you'd have opportunities there. Education for Emma and Grace, society, culture. A easier life than this. Jonas, I mean it, Sarah." He turned to face her, and she saw anguish in his dark eyes. "I took you in thinking you had no choice, thinking you were bound by that contract. But you never were. You've been free this whole time, and I kept you here in this isolated place, made you work like a frontier wife when you could have been happy." Sarah cut in, her voice sharp. "You think I haven't been happy here?" "I think you've made the best of a bad situation," Jonas said. "But now you have real choices. You don't have to stay out of obligation or desperation. You can choose something better." Sarah stood and crossed to him, her heart pounding. "And what if this is what I choose? What if I want to stay here with you, not because I have to, but because I want to?" "Sarah, you don't have to say that. I'm not saying it because I have to. I'm saying it because it's true." She took his hands, those strong, scarred hands that had carved her a comb and taught her to survive. "Jonas, do you understand what the marshal just told us? We were never bound by that contract. Which means every choice I made to stay, every moment of building this life with you, I made freely. I chose it. I chose you. You didn't know you had other options." "I knew," Sarah said firmly. "Maybe not the legal details, but I knew I could have left. Could have written to family, found some way back east. But I didn't want to, Jonas. I wanted to be here, with you." Jonas looked at her with something like wonder. "Even knowing what you know now? That you're free to go? Free to have a different life?" "Especially knowing that," Sarah said. "Don't you see? Before, I could have told myself I was staying because I had no choice. But now that choice has been given to me explicitly, and my answer is the same. I choose this life. I choose this mountain. I choose you." His hands came up to cup her face, and she saw moisture in his eyes. "I don't deserve you." "That's not for you to decide," Sarah said, smiling through her own tears. "Jonas, you took me in when you didn't have to. The marshal said the contract wasn't binding, but that means you had no obligation either. You could have turned us away at the trading post, but you didn't. You said, 'I'll take all three,' and you meant it. Not because you had to, because you chose to." "I did choose it," Jonas admitted. "From the first moment I saw you standing there with your sisters, something in me just knew. This was meant to be. You were meant to be here." "Then we've been choosing each other all along," Sarah said softly. "The contract didn't matter. It never mattered. What mattered was this, us deciding, day by day, to build something real." Jonas pulled her into his arms, holding her tight. Sarah felt his heart racing against her chest, felt the tremor in his strong frame. She understood. He'd been terrified she'd choose to leave, terrified that given real freedom, she'd realize she deserved better than a mountain trapper twice her age. But he was wrong. There was nothing better than this. Than him. "I want to do it right this time," Jonas said against her hair. "No false contracts. No confusion about obligations. Sarah Bennett, will you marry me? Truly marry me, of your own free choice, because you want to and not because you have to." Sarah pulled back enough to see his face. "Yes," she said clearly. "Yes, I'll marry you, because I love you, Jonas McKenna. I choose you freely, gladly, for as long as you'll have me." "Forever then," Jonas said, and kissed her properly for the first time. No hesitation, no holding back. Just honest love and commitment. When they finally broke apart, they found Emma and Grace standing in the doorway of their room, matching grins on their faces. "We're staying, right?" Emma asked. "All of us?" Sarah looked at her sisters, these young women who'd grown so much over the winter. "That depends. This is your choice, too. If you want to go back east, want to have the opportunities there, this is home," Grace said firmly. "We don't want to leave." "Unless," she looked worried, "unless you think we should?" "Not unless you want to," Sarah said, her heart swelling. "Jonas and I, we want you here. Both of you. This is a family decision, and we all get a say." "Then we're staying," Emma said. "All of us, together." When the marshal returned the next morning, Sarah met him at the door with her answer. "We're staying," she said simply. "All three of us. This is our home." The marshal smiled, as if he'd expected nothing less. "Then I'll need you and Mr. McKenna to sign some papers officially dissolving the fraudulent contract and confirming that you're remaining of your own free will. Just for the record, you understand." They signed the papers, Sarah's hand steady, Jonas's careful and sure. And with each signature, Sarah felt a sense of rightness settle over her. This wasn't an ending. It was a beginning, the real beginning of their life together. After the marshal left, Jonas took Sarah's hand and led her outside. The spring sun was warm on their faces, the meadow greening around them. In the distance, the peaks still wore their caps of snow, eternal and enduring. "We should go to town soon," Jonas said. "Find that circuit preacher. Make this official before God and community." "Yes," Sarah agreed. "But Jonas, even without papers or preachers or witnesses, this already is official. We've chosen each other. That's what matters." "It does matter," Jonas said, pulling her close. "But I want the world to know you're mine. Want everyone to know I'm yours. Want it set in stone and celebrated proper." Sarah laughed, joy bubbling up inside her. "Then let's do it. Let's get married for real, Jonas McKenna. Let's make this official in every way that counts." "Soon," he promised. "As soon as the trails are clear enough. We'll take the wagon to town, all four of us. We'll find that preacher, and I'll stand up in front of anyone who cares to witness and claim you as my wife." "I'll be ready," Sarah said. And standing there in the spring sunshine with the man she'd chosen and who'd chosen her, Sarah Bennett knew she finally, truly was home. They planned the journey for 2 weeks later, when Jonas deemed the mountain trails safe enough for wagon travel. Those 2 weeks felt both endless and too short, Sarah caught, between eagerness to make their union official and a strange reluctance to leave the mountain sanctuary they'd built together. But there was work to be done. A wedding, even a simple frontier ceremony, required preparation. Sarah had one decent dress, the traveling suit she'd worn from Boston, now carefully cleaned and mended. Grace helped her take it in where she'd lost weight over the hard winter, then let it out again in the places where frontier food and work had given her new strength. Emma surprised them both by crafting a beautiful leather belt, tooled with an intricate pattern of mountain flowers she'd learned from studying Jonas's work. "For your wedding?" Emma said shyly, presenting it. "So you have something new." Sarah's eyes filled with tears. "It's beautiful, Emma. Perfect." Jonas, meanwhile, was doing his own preparing. He disappeared into the barn for long hours, and when Sarah asked what occupied him so thoroughly, he'd just smile that rare smile and tell her she'd see what he was building. She discovered a week before the journey was a bed. A real bed, sturdy and beautiful, with carved posts and a headboard worked with the same care he'd put into her comb. He'd been working on it secretly for months, he admitted, since long before the marshal's visit. "I was going to wait until we could do a proper wedding," he said, running his hand along the smooth wood. "But it seemed right to finish it now. Our marriage bed, Sarah. I wanted it to be something fine. Something we could pass down someday." Sarah traced the carvings, mountain peaks and pine trees, and there in the center, worked so skillfully she almost missed it at first, 3 small flowers intertwined. "For us," Jonas explained. "You and Emma and Grace, the family we built together." The bed went into the main room, set in the space Jonas had curtained off for himself all winter. It would be their room now, their private space, and the twins would have the small bedroom to themselves. Young women who deserved their own. The changes felt right, natural, like pieces of their lives falling into proper alignment. 3 days before they were set to leave, Jonas rode to the trading post alone to arrange for the wagon rental and to send word ahead to Sweetwater, the small town where the circuit preacher was due to arrive. He returned with supplies and news. The preacher would indeed be there, and the town was planning what passed for a celebration. "Seems folks are curious," Jonas said with mild embarrassment. "Word's gotten around about the mountain hermit taking a wife." "Let them be curious," Sarah said, laughing. "We've earned a celebration, I think." The night before departure, Sarah couldn't sleep. She lay in the narrow bed with her sisters, listening to their quiet breathing, and thought about everything that had brought them to this moment. The deaths and debts that had driven her from Boston. The desperate gamble of answering that advertisement. The terror of arriving with her sisters in tow, certain of rejection. And then Jonas. Jonas with his quiet strength and hidden kindness. Jonas who'd said 5 words that changed everything. "I'll take all 3. Are you nervous?" Grace whispered in the darkness. "A little," Sarah admitted. "Not about marrying Jonas. I'm certain about that. But about everything else. Meeting people. Being part of a community again. What if they don't accept us?" "They will," Emma said with confidence beyond her years. "Jonas is respected. And anyone who meets you will see what we see, strength and goodness and grace. And if they don't," Grace added fiercely, "then that's their loss. We don't need their approval to be a family." Sarah smiled in the darkness. Her sisters had grown so much. They were no longer the frightened girls who'd huddled in her skirts at the trading post. They were capable young women who'd survived a brutal winter and emerged stronger for it. "I love you both," Sarah said softly. "Whatever happens tomorrow, whatever the future brings, I'm so grateful I have you." "We're grateful for you too," Grace whispered. "And for Jonas. He saved us, Sarah. All of us." "We saved each other," Sarah corrected gently. "That's what family does." Morning came bright and clear, the kind of perfect spring day that felt like a benediction. They packed the wagon with their few belongings and the supplies they'd need for the journey. Jonas had clearly put thought into the arrangements, creating a comfortable space in the wagon bed with furs and blankets where Sarah and the twins could ride when the road grew rough. Before they left, Jonas did something unexpected. He went to the small wooden chest where he kept his most precious possessions and withdrew a tarnished gold band on a leather cord. Margaret's ring. Sarah had seen him wearing it around his neck, but now he stood before her with it in his palm. "I want to bury this," he said quietly. "Here, on the mountain. She'd have wanted me to move forward, to be happy again. And I can't marry you properly while still wearing her ring." He paused, his eyes finding Sarah's. "But I wanted you to see it first. Wanted you to know that I'm not forgetting her. I'm just making room for you." Sarah's throat tightened with emotion. "Where will you bury it?" "Asterisk. There's a place," Jonas said. "Up the ridge where the wildflowers grow thickest in summer. Margaret loved it there. Used to sit for hours watching the hawks circle." He looked at the ring in his palm. "Seemed right to leave a part of her there, to let her rest while I move forward." "We could all go," Sarah suggested. "If that would be acceptable. To say goodbye together." Jonas's eyes softened. "I'd like that." So they climbed the ridge together, Jonas and Sarah, Emma and Grace, to the place where wildflowers would soon bloom. Jonas knelt and dug a small hole in the earth with his knife, then laid the ring gently inside. "Thank you," he said softly, speaking to a woman 15 years gone. "For loving me. For teaching me what it means to have a family. For making me believe I deserved happiness." He paused, his voice thick. "I hope you'd approve of Sarah. I think you would. You'd have been friends, I think. You'd have loved the girls." He covered the ring with earth, tamping it down gently. Then he stood, and Sarah took his hand. "I promise to honor her memory," Sarah said quietly. "To never ask you to forget what you had. She helped make you the man you are, Jonas. The man I love." Jonas squeezed her hand, unable to speak. But Sarah saw the gratitude in his eyes, the relief of being understood. They returned to the cabin to find Emma and Grace had loaded the last of the supplies. The cabin looked smaller somehow, as if their leaving had already diminished it. But Sarah knew it would be here waiting when they returned. Home. Their anchor in the wilderness. The journey to Sweetwater took 2 days of steady travel. The trails were muddy with snowmelt, and twice they had to stop to clear fallen branches from the path. But the weather held fair, and Jonas proved as competent a driver as he was at everything else. They camped the first night beside a creek, Jonas showing the twins how to set a proper camp and build a fire that wouldn't be seen from too far away. Old habits from his trapping days. When being alone in the wilderness meant staying alert to danger, Sarah watched him with the girls. Patient and thorough in his teaching, and felt her heart swell with love. He'd become a father to them without pretense or hesitation. They were his daughters now in all but blood, and he treated them with the same care he'd have given his own child if she'd lived. That night, after Emma and Grace had bedded down in the wagon, Jonas and Sarah sat by the dying fire. He'd been quiet all day, and Sarah sensed he was wrestling with something. Having second thoughts? She asked gently. "No," he said quickly. "Never that. Sarah, I'm 43 years old. Set in my ways, not educated or refined like you deserve. And tomorrow, I'm going to stand up in front of the whole town and claim you as my wife. Part of me wonders if they'll think I'm a fool, an old mountain man with delusions of deserving someone like you." Sarah moved closer, taking his hand. "Jonas McKenna, look at me." When his eyes met hers, she continued firmly, "I am a woman who was desperate and alone, who gambled everything on a stranger's word. You gave me and my sister shelter when you had every right to turn us away. You taught us to survive. You made us family. If anyone in that town thinks poorly of our marriage, they're not worth our concern. But what about you?" Jonas asked. "Do you ever regret it? Choosing this life? Tomorrow you'll be legally bound to me, Sarah, to this mountain and this hard life. Last chance to change your mind." Sarah cupped his weathered face in her hands. "I will never regret choosing you. Never. You are the best man I've ever known, Jonas, and I'm proud to become your wife." He kissed her then, deeply and thoroughly, and Sarah felt the last of his doubts dissolve. When they finally parted, both breathing hard, Jonas rested his forehead against hers. "Tomorrow," he said. "Tomorrow you'll be Mrs. McKenna." "Tomorrow," Sarah agreed, "and every day after." They reached Sweetwater by midday the next day. It was larger than Sarah had expected, a proper town with a main street, several stores, a church, even a small hotel. People stopped to stare as they passed, curious about the mountain man who'd come to town with 3 women. Jonas drove straight to the church, where the preacher was waiting, a kindly middle-aged man named Reverend Carson, who'd clearly been briefed on their situation. "Mr. McKenna," he said warmly, "and this must be your bride. Welcome, all of you." The church was small but well kept, its pews worn smooth by years of use. Reverend Carson had arranged for a few witnesses, the proprietor of the general store and his wife, an older couple who ran the hotel, but word had clearly spread because others began filtering in. Curious townspeople wanting to witness the mountain hermit's wedding. Sarah felt a moment of panic. She'd imagined something small and private, not this public display. But then Jonas took her hand, his grip strong and steady, and she remembered what mattered. Not the witnesses or the setting or anything else. Just the two of them, making promises they'd already kept in their hearts. "Are you ready?" Jonas asked quietly. Sarah looked into his eyes, those dark, watchful eyes that had seen so much sorrow and were now filled with hope. She thought of the journey that had brought them here, of all the small choices and large chances that had woven their lives together. "I'm ready," she said. "Let's get married, Jonas McKenna." And together, they stepped forward to claim the future they'd chosen. Constance Hartford swept toward them with the confidence of old, Boston money and unquestioned authority. She was perhaps 50, elegantly dressed despite the long journey, her face showing the same delicate features Emma and Grace had inherited. "My dear girls," she said, reaching for the twins with trembling hands. "When I returned from abroad and learned of my brother's death, of Eleanor's passing, I searched everywhere for you. The house was sold. The neighbors said you'd vanished." Her voice broke with what seemed genuine emotion. "I feared the worst. And then I heard rumors of the matrimonial fraud investigation, traced the records, and discovered you'd come here with your sister." Emma and Grace stood frozen, caught between their past and present. Sarah stepped forward, placing herself subtly between the twins and their aunt. "Aunt Constance," she said with careful courtesy, "I'm Sarah. We've never met, but the girl spoke of you." Constance's sharp eyes took in Sarah's simple wedding dress, the gold band fresh on her finger, the protective stance. "I see congratulations are in order. Though I must say, Sarah, taking your sisters into the wilderness, whatever were you thinking?" "I was thinking they'd be safer with me than in a Boston orphanage," Sarah said evenly. "Our options were limited." "But they're not limited now," Constance said. Her attention shifted to Jonas, who stood silent and watchful beside Sarah. "Mr. McKenna, I presume? I understand you've provided shelter for my nieces. That's commendable, but surely you must see this is no life for young ladies of their breeding." "They seem to be doing just fine," Jonas said quietly. "Fine?" Constance's eyebrows rose. "Mr. McKenna, I mean no disrespect, but these girls are meant for society, education, culture. Emma should be attending finishing school. Grace should be preparing for university. Yes, university. There are women's colleges now, and Grace has the mind for it." She turned back to the twins. "I have the means to provide all of this. A proper home in Boston, the best schools, introduction to society. Everything your parents would have wanted for you." Sarah felt Emma's hand find hers, felt Grace press close to her other side. The twins were trembling, and Sarah's heart ached for them. Constance wasn't wrong. She could offer opportunities that life on a Montana mountain never could. "Aunt Constance," Grace said, her voice small but steady, "where were you? When Mother and Father died, where were you?" Constance's face softened with genuine regret. "In Paris, darling. I didn't receive word until I returned months later. If I'd known—" "But you didn't," Emma cut in, her voice stronger than Grace's. "Sarah was there. Sarah kept us together when we had nothing. Sarah brought us here, yes, but Jonas gave us a home. They gave us a family." "A family?" Constance looked pained. "My dears, I am your family, blood family, and I have a legal claim as your closest living relative. I've already consulted with the territorial authorities. Given your age and circumstances, I can petition for guardianship." The threat hung in the air, unspoken but clear. Sarah felt Jonas tense beside her, saw his jaw clench. But before he could speak, Reverend Carson stepped forward. "Mrs. Hartford," he said gently, "perhaps this conversation would be better held in private. This is, after all, a wedding celebration." Constance had the grace to look abashed. "Of course. Forgive me. I've been traveling for weeks, desperate to find the girls. My judgment of appropriate timing may be impaired." She looked at Emma and Grace with undisguised longing. "But we do need to talk, all of us, about the future." They reconvened an hour later in Reverend Carson's small office behind the church, Sarah and Jonas, Emma and Grace, Constance, and the Reverend himself as mediator. The territorial magistrate had also been summoned, a pragmatic man named Judge Morrison, who clearly dealt with custody disputes before Constance presented her case with eloquence and obvious love for her nieces. She detailed the life she could provide, the Boston townhouse, the schools, the cultural advantages. She produced financial documents showing her considerable wealth. She spoke of family legacy and the girls' rightful place in society. Sarah watched the twins' faces as their aunt spoke. She saw the flicker of interest, the pull of a world they'd once known. Emma had always loved beautiful things. Grace had hungered for books and learning beyond what their modest circumstances could provide. Could Sarah really deny them this chance? Could she ask them to choose a hard mountain life over the opportunities Constance offered? When it was Jonas's turn to speak, he stood slowly, his weathered face serious. "I can't offer what Mrs. Hartford can," he said simply. "No fancy schools or society, just a mountain cabin and honest living. But I can offer them something else." He looked at Emma and Grace. "I can offer them choice. They're old enough to have a say in their own futures. Seems to me the right thing is to ask them what they want." Judge Morrison nodded approvingly. The girls are 16, nearly 17. In my experience, at that age, their wishes carry weight. He looked at the twins kindly. Emma, Grace, what do you want? The twins looked at each other, some silent communication passing between them. Then Emma stood, her spine straight, looking every inch the young woman she'd become. May I show you something, Aunt Constance? She asked. From her pocket, she drew the trapping knife Jonas had given her, its handle worn smooth from use. Jonas gave me this, taught me to use it properly, to set traps, track game, survive in the wilderness. She met her aunt's shocked eyes. In Boston, I was learning embroidery and painting. Here, I'm learning to be capable, to be strong. Grace stood beside her sister. And Jonas has been teaching me from his books, but more than that, he's teaching me to see the world differently. The mountains, the seasons, the way everything connects. It's an education too, Aunt Constance. Just a different kind. But your futures, Constance began. Our futures are ours to choose, Emma said firmly. And we choose to stay. Sarah's breath caught. Jonas's hand found hers under the table, gripping tight. This is our home, Grace added. Jonas and Sarah are our parents now. We love you, Aunt Constance. We're grateful you searched for us. But we're not lost. We're exactly where we want to be. Constance sat back, her face a mixture of grief and reluctant admiration. You've grown up, she said softly. Both of you. I can see it now. You're not the frightened children I imagined. No, Emma agreed. We're not. Thanks to Sarah and Jonas, we're survivors. Judge Morrison cleared his throat. Mrs. Hartford, while you do have a claim as blood relative, given the girls' clear wishes and the fact that they're being well cared for, he looked at Sarah and Jonas. In a legally recognized family unit as of today, I'm inclined to deny your petition for custody. Constance closed her eyes briefly, and Sarah saw the woman's genuine pain. Despite everything, she'd wanted her nieces back, had imagined reuniting what remained of her family. However, the judge continued, I see no reason why arrangements couldn't be made for regular contact. Perhaps the girls could visit Boston periodically, experience what their aunt has to offer while maintaining their primary residence here. It was a compromise, and everyone in the room knew it. But as Sarah watched, Constance's face shifted from grief to hope. Would you consider it? She asked the twins. Coming to Boston for a few weeks each year? Letting me be part of your lives, even if I can't be your guardian? Emma and Grace looked at Sarah and Jonas. Sarah nodded, giving permission she knew she had no right to withhold. We could do that, Grace said. If Sarah and Jonas agree. 1 month a year, Jonas said, but only if they want to go. No obligation. Constance nodded, tears streaming down her face. Thank you. That's more than I hoped for. She looked at Sarah with new respect. You've raised them well, both of you. I was wrong to assume otherwise. Later, after the agreements were signed and Constance had retreated to the hotel, the four of them stood outside the church in the fading light. Sarah felt exhausted but triumphant. They'd survived the challenge, emerged intact. Thank you, she said to the twins, for choosing us, for choosing this life. There was never any question, Emma said simply. You're our family. This is our home. Jonas pulled them all close, his arms encompassing his new wife and daughters. Let's go home, he said. Back to our mountain. And Sarah knew, with absolute certainty, that they would be. The journey home felt different than the journey out. Sarah sat beside Jonas on the wagon seat, his wife now in truth-in-law, watching the familiar mountains grow larger as they approached. Emma and Grace dozed in the wagon bed, exhausted from the emotional upheaval of the past days, but peaceful in their certainty as they climbed into the high country. Sarah reflected on how much had changed since that desperate day. She'd stepped off the stagecoach with her sisters clinging to her skirts. She'd been terrified then, braced for rejection, prepared to beg if necessary. She'd never imagined discontentment, belonging, love. "What are you thinking?" Jonas asked quietly. "That I'm happy," Sarah said simply. "Truly happy. Is that strange, given how hard this life is?" Jonas smiled, his rare, transformative smile. "Not strange at all. Sometimes the hardest things are the most worthwhile." He glanced at her, his dark eyes warm. "I'm happy too. Didn't think I could be again after Margaret. But you've shown me it's possible to love twice in a lifetime, to build something new without forgetting what came before." They reached the cabin as sunset painted the peaks gold and rose. The clearing looked the same as when they'd left, the sturdy log walls, the barn and outbuildings, the meadow greening with spring growth. But to Sarah, it looked different now, not just a shelter but a home. Her home. Jonas helped them down from the wagon and began unloading their few purchases from town. Sarah started to help, but he stopped her with a gentle hand on her arm. "Wait," he said. "There's something, a tradition, I suppose. Husband carries his bride over the threshold." He looked almost shy. "If you'd like." Sarah smiled, her heart swelling. "I'd like that very much." Jonas swept her into his arms with surprising ease, and Sarah laughed as he carried her through the door. Emma and Grace cheered from behind them, their voices echoing in the clearing. Inside, the cabin felt welcoming despite having stood empty for days. Jonas had banked the fire before leaving, and it took only moments to coax it back to life. Soon the space was warm and glowing, the familiar comfort of home settling over them all. That evening, they shared a simple meal supplies from town, cooked on their own stove, eaten at their own table. The conversation was quiet, comfortable, the kind of talk that comes from people who know each other deeply and don't need to fill every silence. After the twins had gone to bed, Jonas showed Sarah the new sleeping arrangement. He'd set up the beautiful bed he'd made, with fresh linens and the best of Margaret's quilts. A small dresser stood nearby for Sarah's things, and he built a shelf for her mother's recipe book and the few precious items she'd brought from Boston. "Our room," he said. "Our bed. The beginning of our life together as husband and wife." Sarah touched the carved headboard, tracing the intertwined flowers that represented their family. "It's perfect, Jonas. Everything is perfect." That night, as she lay in her husband's arms for the first time, Sarah felt peace settle over her like a benediction. Outside, the mountains stood eternal in the darkness. Inside, a family slept chosen and cherished and home. The summer that followed was a season of growth. Jonas taught Sarah and the twins more about mountain life, how to recognize medicinal plants, how to preserve food for the coming winter, how to read the weather and the behavior of animals, and the movement of clouds. Emma's skill with leather had progressed to the point where Jonas could sell her work at the trading post alongside his own pelts. Grace had started writing poetry and observations about mountain life that she read aloud by firelight, her words painting pictures of their world. And Sarah had discovered, to her surprised joy, that she was carrying a child. She told Jonas on a warm August evening as they sat on the porch watching the sunset. He'd gone very still, his hand finding hers, his eyes wide with wonder and fear. "Are you certain?" he'd asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "As certain as I can be," Sarah said, placing his hand on her still flat belly. "Come winter, maybe early spring, we'll have a baby, Jonas." She'd seen the shadow cross his face, the memory of Margaret, of the child who'd never drawn breath. His fear was palpable, and Sarah understood it. "I'm scared too," she admitted. "But Jonas, we're not alone this time. We have each other. We have Emma and Grace. We have a whole community in town now, and Dr. Henderson said he'd come when my time drew near." Jonas pulled her close, his face buried in her hair. "I can't lose you," he said roughly. "I won't survive it again, Sarah." "You won't lose me," Sarah promised, knowing she had no right to make such a promise but making it anyway. "I'm strong, Jonas. Mountain strong now. And I'm fighting for all of us. You, our baby, our girls. I'm not going anywhere." Over the following months, Jonas had become fiercely protective. He'd started building a cradle, beautiful, intricate work that showed all his skill and love. Emma and Grace had sewn tiny clothes and blankets, their excitement over the coming baby infectious. And Sarah had felt herself grow rounder and stronger, her body doing the ancient work of creating new life. When winter came again, it felt different than the last. They were prepared now, with stores of food and fuel, with knowledge and experience. And they were united, a family tested and proven, ready to face whatever challenges came. The baby arrived on a February morning during a gentle snowfall. The labor was long and hard, but Sarah was strong, and Dr. Henderson proved competent and calm. When the baby's first cry split the air, Sarah saw Jonas's face transform with wonder and relief. "A girl," Dr. Henderson announced, placing the squalling infant on Sarah's chest. "Healthy and loud. Congratulations." Jonas knelt beside the bed, his large, scarred hand cradling their daughter's tiny head with exquisite gentleness. Tears streamed down his weathered face, and Sarah had never seen him look so vulnerable or so full of joy. "She's perfect," he whispered. "Sarah, she's perfect. What should we name her?" Sarah asked, though they discussed this many times during the long winter. Jonas looked at their daughter, then at Sarah, then at Emma and Grace, who'd crept in to see their new sister. "Margaret," he said softly, "for my first love, and Grace Emma for her sisters." He met Sarah's eyes. "If that suits you." "Margaret Grace Emma McKenna," Sarah said, testing the name. "Maggie, for short." The baby quieted at her mother's voice, her tiny fist curling around Jonas's finger with surprising strength. And in that moment, looking at her husband's face, at the baby in her arms, at the twins glowing with pride, Sarah understood that this messy, complicated, beautiful life was exactly what she'd been searching for all along. The mountains stood eternal outside, winter holding the land in its grip. But inside the cabin, in the warm glow of firelight, a family gathered close. A mountain man who'd learned to love again. A woman who'd gambled everything and won more than she'd dreamed. Two young women who'd found strength in wilderness. And a baby girl who would grow up knowing she was cherished and chosen and home. "Tell me again," Jonas said quietly, still watching baby Maggie with wonder. "How we got here. How I got so lucky." Sarah smiled, her hand finding his. "Some promises change everything," she said, echoing the words from that first day. "And some kindness comes from the most unexpected places." "You said 5 words, Jonas McKenna. You said, 'I'll take all 3. And in saying yes to us, in choosing us when you had every reason not to, you gave us everything." "No," Jonas said, his voice thick with emotion. "You gave me everything. You taught me it's possible to love again, to build a family from choice and circumstance, to be happy despite fear." He looked around the cabin at the life they'd built together. "This is what I always wanted, even when I thought it was impossible. A full house, laughter in the rooms, love in every corner." "Then we're both lucky," Sarah said, "because this is exactly where I want to be. With you, with our girls, in this place we've made home." Outside, the snow fell softly, blanketing the mountain in white silence. Inside, the fire burned warm, and a family built not from blood alone, but from courage and choice and love settled in for the night. And they were home at last, all of them, exactly where they belonged.